Folks, it's been an unusual year for a lot of reasons. The coronavirus has changed the way we've lived our lives, and in a lot of ways is still shaping the way we go about our day-to-day business, although things have opened up, and I think we're all feeling pretty good about that. Here in North Dakota, we're doing very well. We've also had national protests over law enforcement and law enforcement abuses, I think it's fair to say. And, you know, there's a lot going on with that as well. And we've had a primary process here in North Dakota that's been unusual. Because of the coronavirus, it is being held entirely by mail. You know, I have some feelings about that. And let me ask my guests about that, first of all. State Representative Rick Becker, Republican from Bismarck. Rick, I like the idea of making it easy to vote. Like, I want people who are engaged and want to vote. I don't want it to be a hassle. But I've always felt that there needs to be some gravity to the process, right? Like, this is one of the most important things you do as a citizen, right? I mean, it's like voting, you know, serving on a jury is hugely important. I mean, these are important things that we do as citizens. Yep. And so I just sometimes it's with the early voting and the vote by mail, I'm not sure it's good for our process. Like, voting by mail, I don't know. Like, if you're voting from your couch, or does it encourage casual voting? You know, I kind of feel like it does. And then also, I don't know that I like early voting. I think it's a huge advantage for incumbents. I mean, if you're a challenger and you're coming into an election season and you're going up against an incumbent, you have to overcome their name recognition. You have to overcome some of the institutional fundraising advantages that they're going to have. And then if it's voting early, you're going to have a lot of people casting their ballots and locking their votes in before you even really get a chance to maybe contrast yourself and introduce yourself to them, contrast yourself with the incumbent, maybe reveal some things about the incumbent that might sway some votes. You know, I don't know. I liked it when we voted on Election Day, but I feel like people think I'm an old stick in the mud because of that.
Yeah, I see where you're coming from. I think that when it's an occasion, you know, like you said, some gravity to the situation, I think that's a good thing. But of course, allowing the maximal access, I think, is also good. So, you know, I think early voting, in my opinion, is okay, but you can get too far. You know, you get so early, allegedly to make it easy. Well, okay, the candidates have barely begun to express what they stand for at that point. So. And then this mail-in, you know, that's a really interesting thing to me. On one hand, if I was going to be devil's advocate in favor, you know, I think that people get the ballot, they sit down at the kitchen table and they look at it and they're like, I didn't think about this race, or I never heard about this person, and then they, you know, call their friend or whatever else and say, you know, what do you think about this? Do you know this person?
Or they could do some Google searching or look up a website or something like that. Yeah, I mean, I guess that makes sense. Something like that, yeah. I mean, that makes sense. But, I mean, I want informed voters. I mean, I'm always worried about people just kind of voting randomly. I helped my daughter vote for the first time. She's 19. So this is the first election that she is getting to vote in. And so we walked through it, and I kind of told her my philosophy. I said, even I, as engaged as I am, I will sometimes run into a local office that I don't know. You know, like sometimes we're like electing the weed control board or something, right? It's like, I don't know, you know? And so I don't vote. Like, if I don't know the candidates, I don't vote in that race. And next time it's like, okay, I need to do better, obviously, and engage on this race. But I think sometimes we need. I worry about people just voting randomly, or it's like, oh, I heard that guy's name on the TV more. I'll vote for him. Like, oh, that's how we're gonna choose who's governing us, you know. But I don't know. Yeah. I mean, I don't know how.
And I think that happens a lot, unfortunately. Yeah.
I don't like early voting as much, and I don't know how you would separate the two. Voting by mail is more okay with me than the early voting. I've really come to believe that is such a huge. It's such a huge advantage for incumbents. And listen, campaigns are supposed to be like a crucible, right? It's supposed to put you elected officials through your paces, and hopefully at some point something will happen and we'll sort of break through the veneer, break through some of the polish. And this is less true of local races where the politicians tend to be a little more down to earth and a little less polished and perfect than maybe some of the statewide and higher up races. But to me, I mean, we're supposed to break through the talking points and hopefully reveal something true during the course of a campaign. But if you've already locked in your vote and something gets revealed to you, you can't change that vote.
Yeah, true. Very true.
So anyway, that's an
the other thing about this mail-in is that I think is worthy of note is how we essentially have a mandated mail-in only, and I know it's not exactly mandated, but it kind of is mandated, and I think that it was smart for Burgum in his executive orders to prepare for the possibility that would be required. By lifting the requirement for having at least one polling place as far as a requirement. But I think that it should have been like, okay, this is going to be a possibility that we're prepared for, but until we say otherwise, please let's all all the counties, let's plan to move forward with voting as usual. And if this whole COVID situation seems to really be following a trajectory which prohibits voting in person, then we're ready to go and we'll pull the trigger on that. But we never got close to that. So I think we jumped the gun in sort of, I guess, strongly, the quote, strongly encouraging the voting by mail only. And I think that's a disservice to the people, frankly.
Well, yeah, to me, it's hard. I mean, you roll back the clock. I mean, it's 2020 hindsight. You're right. He was absolutely right to prepare. I don't know. I have a hard time second-guessing at least some decisions made with coronavirus because when at the time some of these decisions were being made, there was just so much we didn't know. And there was so much turmoil, and it was hard. I'm glad I didn't have to make those decisions. Let's put it that way. Let's talk about the primary, though, a little bit, because it's been an unusual. In fact, I was just reading an article by my colleague Patrick Springer that he was kind enough to interview me for and quotes me in, among other sort of political observers in the state. And it's interesting because what a lot of people are saying, and I know you have some feelings about this, leading sort of a caucus within the Republican Party, the Bastiat Caucus, and I realize you're a founder. I think State Representative Dan Ruby's currently the leader, but certainly you're a leader within that movement. Governor Burgum has been involved in this primary in a big way. And I've heard some people, sort of talk about how it's a routine or a return to machine politics. It's Boss Burgum, I hear people throwing around. What are your thoughts on Governor Burgum's and I should describe for people, I guess, who haven't been paying attention, his involvement in this process is, by the way, if you're listening to this podcast, I'm assuming you've probably been paying attention to this stuff. I don't know how you found me if you haven't been paying attention to this stuff. But basically, Governor Burgum has, he's had a rocky relationship with the legislature. This election cycle, he has some of his staff, or former staff, I should say, some of his people have founded a PAC, a political action committee, and the way they structured it, they are spending big money supporting the legislative candidates that they want. And obviously, they've been involved in the state treasurer's race as well. And he has poured a lot of his own money into it. He's raised some money from sort of his network of friends, a lot of out-of-state people, but for the bulk of it, his own money spending in these races. And that's pretty unusual because typically you don't see politicians spend their own money like that. So Governor, that's what he's doing. And, there's been accusations that he's trying to buy the legislature or its executive branch, meddling in the legislature. What are your thoughts on this, Rick?
Well, I think that to say he's putting a lot of his own money in isn't giving the clearest picture. I mean, it's okay. The amount is staggering. Nearly $2 million of his own money going directly to candidates or mostly to the PAC that his people formed at his, direction. And the amount is important because, as you know, in a lot of the legislative races, state legislative races, district races, you can run an entire campaign on $10,000 to $20,000.
Right.
And there's definitely outliers, and those are the ones that frequently get written about. One of the Senate races in Bismarck, for example, was
well into the six-figure territory. And it kind of depends. Like
right.
If it's a hot race,
right.
or it's an area where one party or the other is trying to peel off, break some new ground into a district, controlled by another, or it's a race that just gets a lot of attention. But typically across the state, like you said, $10,000 to $20,000 is a pretty typical legislative campaign.
In 2012, a brand new district that I found myself in when I ran for the first time, it was about $10,000. So now when you think about Burgum putting in about $2 million, you're talking about a lot of power to get people that he wants into these various legislative seats.
Yeah.
Some of it is obvious retribution for instance, Jeff Delzer with appropriations. He seems to be definitely targeting the more conservative people on that spectrum in the Republican Party, and it's also concerning. He's completely throwing terms on their heads as far as saying that this person is a tax cutter or a spending watchdog or a conservative, and there's no regard whatsoever to whether there's a basis for that, whether it's factual. I mean, it's kind of, there's this idea, and we saw it when he was running for governor the first time, that you say what you need to say, and you just inundate the people with that message.
Yeah.
And without any regard for whether there's a kernel of truth in it, you just keep repeating it. And that's why I think people in North Dakota, probably in many districts at least, were getting sick of all of the mailers. I mean, sometimes 3 a day, and they're negative mailers for the opponent. So I'm really dismayed to see Burgum's entry like this. I've disagreed with him on a lot of things in the past, but have always been respectful. I've defended him when there were sort of conflicts with the legislature, because I thought the legislature was being a little bit petty because he, was the outsider. But I can't.
He ran against them too. I mean, he ran against the quote unquote good old boys club in Bismarck. That has left, some lasting resentment.
Yeah,
from people who've been in Bismarck a long time.
His campaign was whatever his campaign people, told him to run on. And in a Trump year, that was the thing to say.
Yeah.
And absolutely it worked. And sure, and for any moderately thin-skinned politicians, that was gonna be bothersome. And so the and frankly, I like conflict between the executive and legislative. It was very pleasant to see that
there should
with
be friction.
Burgum, where we didn't have it with Dalrymple or Hoeven.
Yeah. Well, it was there. I think sometimes with Hoeven especially, that he was very much a behind-the-scenes guy. So it was there, just it wasn't right out in front. And I think it's fair to say wasn't as vigorous as friction as maybe we've seen. I mean, at one point, Governor Burgum, got kicked off the Senate floor because he was wearing jeans.
Right.
He's the governor. Some of that stuff's petty. And frankly, I thought what Jeff Delzer did with Governor Burgum's budget, the way he did it, was petty. I mean, you do that right as the governor's getting ready to get up and give his budget address. You pull that move. I thought that was unnecessary. I think if you want to do that, I think it's not necessary. I think it's a defensible policy position to question how involved the executive branch should be in the legislature's budgeting process. We've had that debate for a long time. But the way he did it, I thought was needlessly provocative.
Well, I'm not sure about that. I mean, you may be right. I don't know of the true details on how it was handled, because that move, if we want to call it a move, was really just a step in a process that had been going on for a couple of sessions, where we're pulling away from having the governor set the budget and then us working off of the governor's budget. Back to what was, I guess, or more closely as originally intended. So it wasn't like out of the blue, like, okay, screw Burgum, because he's not one of us, and so we're going to throw this on him. That it was in the works to do that, regardless of, even if Wayne Stincham had won, that would have been put in place. Now, how it was done, I don't actually know the details, so maybe you could be right.
Let me play. Now, listen, you remember the 2016 campaign. I was tough on Doug Burgum. And a big part of it was because of a lot of the things we said. Now, I think his campaign was just spouting poll-tested one-liners, whatever was going to grab a hook in some voters' mind and get them to vote. I thought it was cynical. I thought it was as authentic as a $3 bill. And I didn't like it. I was much more interested in the actual Doug Burgum. And I think I wrote this at the time. I'm a lot more interested in who Doug Burgum actually is, as opposed to this avatar he creates for himself for campaign season. Because overall, I think Doug Burgum's a good leader. I think the way he campaigns is deeply, deeply cynical. So I didn't like that. I didn't like it in 2016. I have been critical of his approach this primary season in 2020, where he's talking about just the way he's doing it, throwing in his own money like this. But let me play devil's advocate for a moment. If you just look at the legislative races, and obviously this doesn't apply to the treasurer's race because we didn't have a state convention, so there is no party-endorsed candidate. But in the legislative races, out of the districts that he's chosen to get involved in, just one candidate that he's opposing has the local party's endorsement. That's Jeff Magrum in District 28. I always get the district number screwed up. District 28. I think that's right. Jeff Magrum's the only one with his local party's endorsement that Governor Burgum's opposing. Everybody else has been endorsed by their local party. Isn't this Governor Burgum just backing the endorsed candidates?
No. I mean, and I don't even think you believe that. Yeah,
but it's
sure,
true.
There's one,
but it's true.
Been zero. It could have been 4. The thing is, he's backing them based on how they behave as legislators. Are they conservatives that are going to stick to conservative principles? He has no room for that at all. Are they people that are going to be more, quote, pragmatic, that he can, quote, work with, that are going to be more likely to do things like vote for the Theodore Roosevelt Library after being pushed on it for 4 months? Yes. And so in this particular cycle, it was 1 out of, what are we looking at, 5 state legislators. It could have, and so because there was 1 and there could have been 0, I mean, that might fit into what you're saying, but it could have also been that there were 3 or 4 out of the 5 that were endorsed. I really don't, I think that it's much clearer that the way things are lining up is based on ideology, not based on whether they're endorsed or not. And also to say that he's focused on the endorsed candidates completely flies in the face of how he's conducted his own race. He was not the endorsed candidate. He doesn't care about the endorsement process. There's no evidence for that whatsoever.
Yeah, that's fair. He came in 3rd place. When he ran in 2016 at the statewide convention, he came in 3rd place behind yourself and Wayne Stincham. And then he went on to the primary, and obviously he won at the primary. So in June that year. So I think you're right. I mean, I don't think, but it. I mean, it's the idea that these candidates that he's backing have local support. I mean, that's what I'm trying to say. I mean, it's not like they're a bunch of carpetbaggers that Governor Burgum's just propping up. Except for one instance, they won at their local conventions, right? I mean, that's got to speak for something.
I guess. I mean, we know he doesn't care about the party process or the endorsing convention. So, I mean, like I say, it the only reason it has weight is because of how it randomly plays out. That 1 out of 5 was endorsed. I mean, but if you look at the ideology, then suddenly it lines up to be 100%.
Now, earlier I said that I felt that in the aggregate, Governor Burgum's been a good leader. And I do believe that. I have areas where I disagree with him, but for the most part, I think he's been a good governor. And you kind of said, really? Do you disagree? You don't think Governor Burgum's been a good governor?
I think I don't think he's been horrible. I don't know. I was curious what makes him a good governor so far that he's done. Now, he's looking for efficiencies, right? So, and I like that a lot. I love that. Looking for efficiencies of government. And I like the idea that he broke the sort of coronation, the heir apparent, where you take your turn and you do your time and you play by the rules. And so, broke that up. But I mean, I'm certainly open. I don't think he's been a good leader for COVID during this COVID process. I mean, I think you can look just one state south to find much better leadership there. But I'm open. I mean, you tell me what makes him a good leader, a good governor.
I think he has handled the COVID situation. I mean, Governor Noem in South Dakota has probably had a lighter touch than Governor Burgum did. But, man, you look at some other places like Michigan or even we were talking about before the show, you just got back from Colorado, places like that. North Dakota's been a significantly more pleasant place to ride out coronavirus than there. And I realize maybe that's damning with faint praise, but
exactly.
For the most part, I feel like he's done an okay job. I mean, I'm not wanting to give the guy the Nobel Peace Prize, but I think he's done fine. And I think some of his efficiencies have been great. I really do like the way he's mixed things up in the executive branch. He's challenged some of these ideas that, for instance, different departments of the executive branch can't share resources. He's pushed through a lot of that stuff. I think it's a big deal. I think it matters. And some of the stuff that people really hang their hat on, like the Teddy Roosevelt Library, I'm honestly struggling to understand why that's so controversial.
Well, the thing about the library, in my mind, there's the actual money on it, right? But that's small beans compared to the overall budget. It is kind of a little irritating because of the amount of money for what it actually gets. The biggest thing in my mind, though, is, and this is a criticism of the legislature more than it is of Burgum, but Burgum had his pet project that he wanted.
Yeah.
And in the beginning, he wasn't ever even close to going to succeed in getting that passed. But he just kept hammering, and he kept working behind the scenes to get. And so, in that respect, I don't know if you'd say leader, but he's politically persistent. He got exactly what he wanted.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what he's doing now. He's saying what he needs to say, and he's doing what he needs to do, and spends what he wants to spend to get what he wants. And so my problem is that he's got these pet projects, kind of like the COVID testing. It's kind of a pet thing for him. He wants to be number one in the nation. He's following the metrics that really aren't doing anything to slow the spread or save lives, but they sure are a good metric that he can say we're number two in the nation and keep working to be number one in the nation, regardless of the cost and regardless of the data or science.
I agree with you that a lot of the stuff that he's done has been cynical. Although I don't know. I mean, you start throwing the word cynical around in politics, who doesn't that apply to? But he's done it. I mean, I look at the treasurer's race, for instance. On one hand, I have Tom Beadle running radio ads saying, I'll support Donald Trump's agenda. And then I have Dan Johnson out here talking about how pro-life he is, as if both of them have forgotten what the treasurer actually does, which is not much, frankly. It seems like the better debate would be whether or not we even need this office anymore. But we have these two people running on platforms that really have little to do with what the treasurer's office does, which I guess is maybe what happens when the treasurer's office just doesn't do very much. But it's very cynical, and it's very frustrating to me, and I don't like that. But isn't this the game, Rick? Because I'm thinking like the Bastiats, and I'm trying to be very careful because I realize sometimes Bastiat gets thrown around like Tea Party was thrown around, and sometimes it can be a little nebulous, particularly if you get people who are not in elected office, who's in and who's out, and I don't know. Sometimes that's hard to define. But I'm thinking I know that Bastiat aligned legislators have sort of run insurgencies in some legislative districts. I'm thinking up here in Minot, one of our legislative districts, Ole Larson Bastiat leader, sort of brought his people to his local convention and got his candidates there, and he won. And honestly, more power to Ole. I mean, we're governed by who shows up. He got his people to the convention. He won. And there was a lot of grumbling in Minot about those candidates. A lot of people didn't really like those candidates, but you know what? They were the endorsed Republican candidates. And that was it. So, I mean, isn't that the game? I mean, is it obviously Governor Burgum's doing it on a different level, and he has his personal wealth that he can pour into this, which is a sort of a very unique thing. But I mean, he's playing the game. He's not being coy about it. He's not trying to hide anything. It's right out in front.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, to a degree, yes, I agree with you. There are some distinct differences. What you discussed with insurgency or the Bastiat, you're talking about district level politics.
Sure.
And grassroots movements and people saying, and it's really what the Bastiat group was all about. If you look at the platform of the Republican Party, and then you look at how the Republican Party in the state has conducted itself, you can say, maybe it would be great if we could try and adhere more closely to the actual platform. And one way to do that would be to associate with other people who feel the same way, and we can toss a name on that association that's really all it is. So then you have in district politics, yeah, you know what, I agree. Let's get somebody in there because the person who has been in there is just filling a seat. They're not abiding by the platform, which is why we're in the Republican Party. So let's get someone else in and let's work hard. That's district politics. That's
Sure.
The beauty of local politics and our representative form of government. Now you move it up to the governor's office, and yeah, there's some of that that can be expected. Usually it's got a little more maybe I don't know. There's a certain degree of comport with the office that you sort of just expect, or as opposed to getting muddy and basically going through these machinations of using the bullet points and the terms in ways that are completely misleading for the sole purpose of stacking your legislature to get what you want. I just think it's very unseemly. I'm not saying it's not illegal. I'm not saying it's improper that he should be removed from office, but I think it's unseemly, and I think it shows some disregard for the division between the executive and the legislative branch. I mean, it'd be one thing to say, I'm Doug Burgum, I'm your governor, and I support these guys. That would be even a big step for what we've normally seen. But then you actually form a pact, throw in a ton of money, more than North Dakota politics has seen, and for these types of races, where you effectively are saying, I'm going to buy this race. I mean, he wouldn't be putting in that much money if he didn't think he could buy the race. I guess we're going to find out if he's successful.
Well, nobody would donate any money to any campaign if they didn't think that campaign could win. That's just, and listen, you use the word unseemly. I've used that exact same word to describe the way Governor Burgum's handled this. I think he's going to get a lot of blowback from, and I guess we'll find out. But I suspect there are at least some voters, whether or not it's enough to upset the apple cart for what Governor Burgum's going for here. But I think there's probably at least some voters who are turned off by the way he's done this. The idea that he's just going to spread around his own money. That when it's one as opposed to like if he had like a grassroots network of supporters, sort of the Burgum coalition, and he had people from across the state donating to this money to this PAC to turn around and then support sort of the candidates that Burgum wants. That's much more grassroots than I'm Doug Burgum and I'm going to write a check, and also a few of my friends are going to write checks too. That's kind of what he's done, and that is absolutely unseemly. And I think there's probably going to be some backlash from voters against that. Whether or not that's enough to upset what he's going for, I don't know. We're gonna find out here shortly. But beyond that, I don't know. I mean, it's the game. I don't have a problem with the governor supporting his own slate of candidates. These are the people I think that are going to, for the same reason that you're saying, well, the party platform, and I think that these candidates best promote what I believe in and what I think the Republican Party believes in and the platform. Governor Burgum's just kind of doing the same thing, right?
Well, again, there's a difference based on the office he's holding and the, I guess, almost the coercive nature of the amount of money he's putting in. And you're right. Beyond that, but that still holds some weight. But beyond that, perhaps you're right. I mean, I can complain that he's truly a Republican in name only, and that him remaking the legislature in his image is not good for the Republican Party. And frankly, is not good for the state, because when we have a more diluted Republican Party, it just furthers that whole, it increases the inroad for a one-party system in North Dakota. If you were to have a more ideologically aligned party to its own platform in the Republican Party, you would give way to a more of a role for the second party in North Dakota, and that would be a healthier society politically. So I think what Burgum is doing as a rhino, I'll say it, is not good for North Dakota.
Well, Rick, I appreciate it. Any final thoughts? We're recording this obviously before we have the results of the vote, but
Yep.
Any final thoughts? Any predictions for the vote outcome?
I don't. No, I don't have predictions, but I'll say this. A lot of people say, well, the politically, I've never been one to pretend something that I don't actually believe. I think that this is a huge, huge primary for the heart and soul of the Republican Party, and if Burgum's people win, it will be a huge blow to conservatism, to the conservative wing of the party, to the Bastiats. This is huge, and it will be a stunning loss. And of course, political wisdom would say, well, he probably is going to win those seats, because political wisdom would say when you outspend your candidates and bombard the people with information, however, whether it's true or not, you're more likely to win. So we'll see what happens. Now, if his people don't win, it will be a stunning loss for Burgum. And it will show that despite being an incumbent with name recognition and a boatload of money, he couldn't get his people in, even though, as you said, 5 out of 6 or 4 out of 5 were even endorsed. So this is going to be huge. And we're either at the end of tonight or whatever, when we find the results, we're either going to see a huge movement toward the conservative wing of the party or of the meaningless moderate wing of the party.
It's going to be interesting, because I'm not sure I'm going to be ready to jump to either conclusion, because I think one thing we've got to keep in mind, we always see this when we have like special elections in Congress, and the national media kind of tries to read the tea leaves. Some legislative district in Michigan, has a special election, and the the national media is trying to extrapolate from that, sort of larger trends. And I think we need to be careful, because sometimes these races are very intensely local, and they may hinge on just, how that person is viewed in his community. I mean, a lot of these, as well as anybody, these legislative races sometimes are settled by just dozens of votes. In a primary, even more so than the general election. So, sometimes it's personal, and sometimes it's local, and it might not have anything to do with Doug Burgum or anybody else. It might just be that person in that district. I don't know. It's going to be interesting to kind of look back and do some forensics on these races after the fact to see. And let me ask you one last question, because this is something that when Patrick Springer was interviewing me, I thought was an interesting point. Generally, the Republican position is money is speech. Right, so we don't want to limit money. Yep. North Dakota has very few limits on campaign spending. Do you feel? Because you're talking a lot about Governor Burgum, influencing this with his money. Do you think we need to put limits on campaign spending or campaign donations?
No.
Okay.
I don't. I think it would be unseemly for the governor to show up drunk to his office, right? But I don't think we should make a law that says the governor can't drink while he's holding office.
Right.
So I think what he's doing is crap, but I don't think we need to have a knee-jerk legislative intervention.
Sure. Yeah. Okay. Well, Rick, I appreciate your time and your comments, and it's always a pleasure to talk with you.
All right. Thanks a lot, Rob.
Thank you.